Good afternoon again, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Madam Superintendent. As we began discussing in the spring, the federal government has recognized that to keep students in America learning, additional funds are needed for districts, and they began to provide the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds to support just that. CARES 1, CARES 2, and now the American Rescue Plan Act allow us to invest in needed crisis response, in the reopening of schools, and needed learning recovery and innovation to be able to do those things. For the ARPA allocation, we shared in April that we would be making investments in 4 areas. You can see them in the board documents that have been provided in detail, but in summary, they are investment in learning environments, student mental health and wellness, addressing interrupted learning and learning acceleration, and lastly, the investments in the transition of many students back to face-to-face for the first time in 18 months, and our investment in Impact Academy as our virtual school option. Much of the proposed ARPA budget was included for your consideration in ARPA with the initial FY22 budget. Those items are color-coded as blue on your copy of the proposed budget. At that time, we shared that the next phase would be a needs assessment with investment bucket teams to dream big about how to solve for the needs of our students, as well as a whole organization survey to solicit feedback and great ideas for how we should proceed. The items in front of you, color-coded yellow, represent these additional items for our proposed budget, also shared with you at our July board meeting. Today, we are seeking your action to endorse our application to the Georgia Department of Education to request these federal funds. This item is available for the consent agenda. Madam Superintendent, that completes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Morse. Madam Chair, that concludes what we prepared, but remain available for any discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Davis, and thank you, Mrs. Morse. Does any board member have any questions or comments? Mr. McDaniel?
Ms. Morse, I have a question. It said the strategies or goals in some of these areas are interrupted learning and learning acceleration. Well, with our students getting to school a little bit late, that's interrupted learning. Can we use any of these funds to potentially look at a way or provide funding for staffing to accelerate staffing needs for our transportation department? Can any of these funds be used for that? So I'm asking you that question because I know that you're following this. But can those funds be used for that purpose?
Sure, Dr. Davis, I think I'll.
Yeah, I think we can actually ask Mr. Allie to weigh in on eligibility of funds. We do know that job families as well as continuity of services are both eligible categories of funding. And Jeff, Mr. Allie, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit on where we are with specific job family services. You probably know the legal regulations of that.
I will check with the Georgia Department of Education to see if transportation is an allowable expense for these funds. Currently, the department has one person reviewing all the applications, and they're taking those in order as they come in, but we can try to get an answer as soon as possible on that. School nutrition and the after-school program, continuity of those programs, they're in the plan to try to recover funds that were lost last year, during the last school year. Historically, those two programs have been self-funding and have not relied on the general fund to provide additional funds to their support. But of course, last year that was not possible. So the continuity of those programs are in this grant.
So I think if that's a recommendation of the board, we take the next step to ask the Georgia Department of Education for their guidance on that recommendation. And then if the full board wants to consider that as part of this application, we would have to do that in the second 2/3, but we certainly could do that. Second 1/3. Sorry.
So my other question, and I guess I have to ask Mr. Allie this question as well. The 52 school-based wellness facilitators and the 52 data clerks, I see that they're checked off for school year 21-22, 22-23, 23-24. So I'm guessing at that time, if is the desire of the board to keep these assets and these needed personnel on board, then that means that we would have to incur those expenses into our general fund. Yes or no?
I mean, if we move beyond the years of the grant, our board will have to consider how they ingest those expenditures into our general operating funds, as usual with any grant-funded initiative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Any other questions or comments? This item is eligible for tonight's consent agenda. Does any board member have an objection with it being placed on the consent agenda? Okay, it will be in our consent agenda this evening. Thank you, Mrs. Morse.